looks like it. Okay, let's see. Everybody can, that's weird. Let's try that. We just wanted to do one slide at a time. There we go. Okay, can you guys see that now?
Yes.
Just one slide at a time. All right. Like Shelley said, I'm a veterinarian and a nutritionist, and my own consulting company is called Sit, Stay, Speak Nutrition. But for the past almost 5 years now, I have been primarily working with a group of nutritionists at this business called Veterinary Nutrition Consultations. There are a number of different little businesses under that umbrella. We're like women owned, and we're, at least in the part of the business that I work on, I'm focused on entrepreneurs who want to make either balanced food or treats in the area of fresh cooked or raw, and they want to make those recipes, or maybe they've been making a recipe for quite a while for their own pet, but now they want to take that and scale it up for the local farmers market or an online subscription service. So in some respects, some of our entrepreneurs are a little bit like your organization, but what I have just learned in the past couple of days is you guys have some interesting exemptions, and I didn't even know about some of those. So I have learned quite a bit just in preparing for this presentation. So that's exciting for me. I will move on and start with this particular, it's like a PDF document, and it also looks like it was made into some PowerPoint slides, but it's the document that's got the Michigan Cottage Foods Law outlined for your organization. And I just want to make a couple points. Maybe you've all read this and you know this intimately, but there might also be some folks here in this presentation that haven't really studied it. And so what I found interesting was, your exemption is that you can sell these foods without a license. That's part of what falls under the Cottage Foods Law. And that an NPH, or a non-potentially hazardous food, is defined as something that does not support that rapid growth of bacteria sufficient enough to make a human sick, and especially when that food is held outside of refrigerated temperatures. So sounds like what I understand is that these are the very kinds of foods that are exempt from licensing. And the other thing that I noticed was that there is a large document that has the list of MPH human foods, which was more recently updated around early December of 2021. And then there's a separate document that features just the MPH pet foods, and that was last updated around August 17th. So the only point about that is just to know and understand that these lists are dynamic, that somebody is updating them as rules and regulations change. And so if you walk away from this presentation and you don't really do anything about this for 5 or 6 more months, you should absolutely go and make sure you're using the most up-to-date list so that you can be as current as possible. The other thing that I noticed that was interesting is that in both of those documents, the pet food and the human NPH food list, there's this list, and it says very clearly in the red box, never allowed under this exemption. So I was talking with Jennifer about this just yesterday, and she said she was reading me the list of some ingredients in one of her pet treats, which included some eggs. And I said, wait a minute, that's not supposed to be true under this particular rule. And she said, well, if it's baked egg, it's okay. So that's interesting to me in that this is not quite as clear as it should be. And so I would encourage everybody to always default to, whenever there's a question, whenever you're in doubt, contact your Michigan or Minnesota Department of Agricultural contact person so that you can absolutely get clear information. And that link or that phone number is available at the end of that handout if you haven't already seen it. There were several resources that I looked at that many of you have probably looked at already, but I would encourage you to think of the phone number at the Minnesota Department of Ag's Pet Food Unit as your absolute default anytime you have any kind of a question, and especially if you are looking at some of these documents or some of this information on the internet and it seems confusing or something's not exactly 100% clear, get your verification from the MDA. The other two resources that I tapped into that, again, were also listed at the end of that particular handout are the ASPCA, American Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, their website, and they've got an animal poison control hotline you can call. And then there's another resource called the Pet Poison Hotline. If I'm not mistaken, both of these particular animal poison control hotlines actually require, when you're calling and you are concerned about an individual pet and what they might have consumed, there will be some sort of fee that you have to pay. But for our purposes today, and some of you might have already known this from going to their websites, you can actually access the websites and find lists of foods that are human foods, not appropriate or potentially toxic for dogs and cats and other animals. And so it's from that information that I pulled some of the information I'm going to share with you. Okay. I should have said this, but we are going to have time at the end for a little Q&A. So if you've got questions, you can hang on to them till the end, or you can put them right in the chat. And between Shelley and I, we'll go find them in the chat. Okay, so a couple of comments first about just general pet foods and pet treats, because this is the place where I have spent a lot of time, and also spent this time not just trying to understand what are the rules and regulations, but also teaching this to veterinary students and to veterinarians. And as you might well imagine, while there are some regulations for pet food and pet treats, but they do vary from state to state, and they absolutely vary from country to country. So when we talk about the Association of American Feed Control Officials, or AFCO, that's really the body of specialists who have come together and said, here's our guidelines and our recommendations for what should be in pet food, how the labels should be listed, what should be in the label, all that sort of stuff. They establish the guidelines, but it's actually up to each individual state in the US to accept those guidelines or to not, or to in fact perhaps make even stricter guidelines above and beyond what AFCO has deemed or recommended. Generally speaking, in the US, most of the states actually accept all or most of AFCO's recommendations for what should be on the label, what's acceptable to be in the food, that sort of thing. There are a couple of states that don't really follow much of anything about AFCO, and in that context, it really is kind of like the Wild West with regard to pet food in those states. And there are also a few states that say we accept these guidelines from AFCO, and we're also going to take one step further and make some additional guidelines, so that you might be considered them as maybe like states that have stricter rules and regulations than most other states. So that's a comment about AFCO. The other bigger comment, you probably had time to read this slide now, so I'll just say that whether or not you're a stakeholder like an individual pet owner, a manufacturer of some treats or food, a veterinarian or someone on the veterinary healthcare team, or somebody working in the wider pet food industry, or maybe you work or volunteer in a shelter, whatever kind of a stakeholder you are, we all have a general expectation of pet food and pet treats that they be safe, and in some instances also that we want food to be effective. And so I want you to think just for a minute about that from the standpoint of, how do we determine if foods or treats are safe? What does that mean for a food or a treat to be safe? And also, how do we determine if a food or a treat is actually effective? What does it mean for something to be effective? So I think, just in general terms, that we want food to be safe in that it's not going to do any harm to the pets that eat the food or the treat, and it's also not going to have any contaminants. Sometimes food can be potentially harmful, though, without actually having any contaminant in it. And many of you will remember from 2008, 2007, the whole pet food recall incident around that contaminant called melamine. Probably the single most important pet food recall in my 30 plus year career as a veterinarian and a nutritionist, because it actually resulted in changes to how pet foods are regulated. But when I also look back on my 30 years in veterinary medicine, I see that very consistently there are recalls for things like aflatoxin, which is a mold, and it comes into the pet food industry in on some of the ingredients. And that kind of pet food recall happens on a regular basis. And so does pet food recalls for salmonella, associated mostly with raw foods, but sometimes with foods that are not raw. So we've got a variety of potential contaminants, and those are the ones that make the headlines. Those are the ones that really get us very concerned. But we also want food to be safe, in that, from a nutritional standpoint, we don't want food to be too heavy in fat, because carrying around too much body fat is problematic for our dogs and cats. And if they take in too many calories and they take in a high fat diet and they don't get enough exercise, we end up with the real phenomenon that we have in North America, which is an obesity epidemic among our dog and cats that are pets. So it doesn't have to be an actual contaminant. It could be a nutrient that's just in a high amount. And we want to make sure that food's safe and has a modest amount of key nutrients without being excessive. I'll jump to the bottom line, though, and you'll see that we actually don't have any nutrient or safety standards established or documented for pet treats in North America. So what that means is it's really up to the manufacturers and the industry as a whole to set some barriers or some boundaries or some guardrails on, how much of anything are we going to allow in our pet treats? How much is enough, and how do we make sure that it's safe? When it comes to the idea of being effective, we really just focus on pet food rather than pet treats, because everybody knows that pet treats are not supposed to be the sole source of nutrition for a dog or a cat. They are intended to be given as a treat or a topper. So intermittently, that might mean once or twice a day. It might, for some pet owners, mean once a week, once a month, or even more rare than that. So even how and when a pet treat is given, even that's not standardized, right? Because that's completely up to the individual pet owner. But when it comes to a complete and balanced pet food, what we do think of as effective does have some nutritional standards, and those are established by AAFCO, again, the Association of American Feed Control Officials. They have, in their guidelines, set some nutrient standards for what kinds of nutrients and how much should be in an adult dog food or adult cat food, as well as what should be in a growth food or a reproductive diet. And what do I want to say about that? Well, I want to just define for you. Often if you go into a pet store and you look at labels, you'll see something that says complete and balanced nutrition. It's a very important phrase, and it's a way for you to understand the manufacturer of that product is trying to tell you they have adhered to the AAFCO nutritional standards. So complete means they've made sure that all the long list of nutrients is accounted for. And balanced means they have met at least the minimum according to AAFCO, and they've not gone over the maximum of some of those nutrients. So complete and balanced has a legal or a pet food industry definition under the AAFCO guidelines. And that's what it means to be effective. There's also that other window or that other niche in the pet food industry that's therapeutic veterinary diets. And you've probably all know about those too. They're specifically designed for medical conditions. And they have some different kinds of nutrient benchmarks or standards. But as a veterinarian, if I want to prescribe a therapeutic diet, I want to make sure that the company can give me some evidence that the food's going to be effective in the patient population I want to treat. So I don't just want the company to tell me they've tested their food in healthy animals. I want to know, have they actually tested their diabetic diet in diabetic pets? that would be more effective evidence that I should probably, think about using that as a treatment option. Okay, so that's a little bit of some general information. And one last slide of general information, and that's just to define and describe, just to separate out what's food and what's treats. And I already did tell you, right? Most commercial pet foods in the United States are marketed as complete and balanced nutrition. So that means they've got all the nutrients accounted for, micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, essential fatty acids, and they're balanced in an appropriate way for the life stage or the species that they're marketed for. Whereas treats do not provide complete and balanced nutrition. The vast majority of commercial treats do not. There are a few commercial treats that actually have the vitamins and minerals in them, but that's not a common thing for treats. If you've got a pet food and it's got that complete and balanced statement on it, then very likely, it's also going to have an AAFCO nutritional adequacy statement, which means it's going to say something like, this food meets the nutritional requirements for an adult dog or a growing puppy. And it was either verified with a formulation process or an actual feeding trial. So that's what an adequacy statement says. And you don't need an adequacy statement. You shouldn't have an adequacy statement on your pet treat label unless you've got vitamins and minerals in there. Pet foods, vast majority of pet foods and treats in the United States all have a guaranteed analysis and a calorie content. What I have learned is that under the cottage law, you don't need to have a guaranteed analysis. But I'm going to talk about a reason why you might want one in just a little while. So we'll talk a little bit about testing at the very end. I already mentioned complete and balanced foods are intended to be the sole source of nutrition for a dog or a cat. So usually the feeding guidelines are framed in that way, whereas treats are not intended to do that. So the recommendations on feeding instructions for a treat can really vary widely. As you well know, if you've looked at lots of treat packaging, it can be something as simple as feed one a day or feed these sporadically, or it could be very specific and prescribed in that maybe the treat manufacturer actually tells you, here's how many calories are per piece. And for a typical 20-pound dog or 50-pound dog or 80-pound dog or a 10-pound cat, here's how many treats per day they should have. That would be pretty prescriptive. And that's not common, but I could make an argument for why that would be a good thing. So I'll save that to the end. And then the only other thing about this is just something that you already know, whether or not it's food or treats, there's all kinds of different formats or forms, and we find all of those forms for both food and treats. So there's really no distinction there. Okay, so now what about the human foods that you do need to avoid in your pet treats? This list comes from those resources that I showed earlier, the ASPCA and the Poison Hotline, and then you can also find a lot of this stuff just by doing a general internet search. So here's the first slide. I tried to go A through Z, and these are the big ones. These are the ones that are going to pop up on a poison control hotline because they're the ones that are seemingly the ones that get our dogs and cats into the most trouble. So yeah, I'm going to go into detail on some of these in just a little bit. Here we go. And then I've got a second slide with some other ones. So it probably should make a lot of sense to you that we would not and should not be giving alcohol of any kind to our pets. And mostly what I want to do on these next few slides is to show you what are the most likely kinds of clinical signs that you might see at home or that a veterinarian might see when the animal is presented to their emergency clinic or to your family vet. And with regard to alcohol ingestion, it's going to be vomiting and diarrhea, but maybe the central nervous system is also affected. Like you do see animals that act drunk, just like you see people acting drunk. And if things are really progressing beyond just a little bit of decreased coordination, you might actually see difficulty breathing or body tremors. And some animals, unfortunately, also can go into alcohol poisoning in which they experience coma or even death. So it can be bad. And it's usually fairly easy to keep alcoholic beverages away from our pets because they're in closed containers in pantries or in the refrigerator. But we do hear about unfortunate instances when I think animals that live or visit fraternities or sororities, they get involved in the parties or even in private homes, and so that can be a problem. All right, moving on to chocolate, coffee, and caffeine. Hopefully, you've also heard about these. They all contain methylxanthines, and it's the agent or the biochemical compound that can really get the animal's heart racing. And you might see that. You might see them panting. You might see them with some excessive activity, but you also might just see a little bit of vomiting, a little bit of diarrhea. You might not put your hand on their chest and feel their heart thumping really hard, but in some animals you might. And probably a lot of you, if you've read about chocolate and the dangers for dogs, what you know is that it's dark chocolate that tends to have more of the xanthines, and white chocolate, very little, and milk chocolate is somewhere in between. And certainly as a veterinarian, I've heard lots of people talk about how their animal, ate a whole box of bonbons right off the coffee table and didn't even have a problem. That might be because of the type of chocolate. It might be because of the size of the animal. It could be remotely possible that the animal went outside where the owner couldn't see, threw it all up, and came back and was fine. But usually, the treatment needs to be get the chocolate out of the animal. So we just really don't want to have any chocolate in your. You don't want to make chocolate chip cookies for your treats. Let me put it that way. All right, onions, garlics, or chives, they can cause gastrointestinal, stomach and intestinal irritation. They might also result in some blood cells damage or actual anemia. And so there's another point here about, cats may be susceptible and dogs are generally at risk if it's a really large amount. So again, you might hear some people who will say things like, my dog's eaten that regularly for all of its life and never had any problem. And while that may be true, since you want to make treats and sell them, to more than just your own pet, you have to have an abundance of caution. And so these are the reasons why we have these don't do these foods on this list. Okay, the next one is grapes and raisins. The interesting thing about grapes and raisins is that there is a problem with them. They do create health issues and can cause kidney failure in dogs, but we really don't know what the toxic substance is. So the general recommendation is, until we know more, just avoid feeding grapes and raisins to dogs. Again, I have certainly had friends and family members who've said, but my dog likes the occasional grape. Okay, well, there's always some risk in doing that, but if it's your own pet, you take on that risk. When you are having a commercial business, then you really want to minimize your risk. And so this is why this list is here for you. The next one is the hops that's used in brewing beer. One thing I learned that I didn't really know is that hops plugs might tend to be more toxic than the pellets. This is also something where the exact substance or principle of toxicity isn't really known, but it's thought that it might be connected to either the resins, the oils, or the phenolic compounds, or something else that's in the plant. Dogs that ingest the hops can really have what's called a malignant hyperthermia, an extremely high body temperature, and that can lead to the racing heart, vomiting, abnormal blood clotting, and even death. So this is a potential serious toxicity to be avoided. The other one is macadamia nuts. They can cause a variety of things, but again, you see vomiting, hyperthermia, tremors, and weakness. These signs can appear, I would say that's not quickly within 12 hours, but they might last as long as 24 or 48 hours. So it's something to make sure that, again, you don't have a chocolate chip or a macadamia nut cookie. As much as we would eat that and enjoy that, not for our dogs. And then probably the most important one, I think, from this first list is xylitol. And if you don't know, it's often been touted as an artificial sweetener, but what it really is, it's a sugar alcohol with a low glycemic index. And it's been found to be beneficial in oral mouthwashes, toothpaste, breath mints, gum and candy for humans. So it's got some value, and it's found to be absolutely safe for humans, but it's really toxic to dogs, even small amounts. What happens is it causes a release in the hormone insulin that dogs make, we all make, and then it can lead to hypoglycemia or low blood sugar in the dog. And that, if it's not checked and not taken care of, it can lead all the way to something as serious as liver failure and death. So again, one of the most common signs that you would see would be vomiting. But you could also see a loss of coordination, might even see some seizures. One new thing that's kind of popped up just very recently, as far as what I understand, is that some people who are trying to market xylitol are calling it birch sugar or birch bark. So all of this is important just to emphasize to you about reading labels, so that you are not putting accidentally some xylitol into one of your actual treats that you're making. And how about actual human foods besides the gum and the candy and the breath mints? Where else might you find xylitol on the list of ingredients? It could be in some barbecue sauces, some ketchups, some syrups, and some peanut butters and nut butters, which is probably, I think, the most important thing to be on your radar, because a lot of treats have peanut butter in them. A lot of dogs like peanut butter, but you want to make sure that it's, to the best of your ability, that it doesn't have xylitol on the label. Okay, here's some more. Avocado pits, cherry pits, peach pits, moldy foods. The bread dough is unbaked bread dough, and then a couple of other things like mushrooms and salt and star fruit. So what avocado has, probably a lot of you know this, is a toxin called persin. And let me just make sure I got that right. Yeah, persin. It's actually known to be deadly to other species besides dogs and cats. So they are rarely affected in the same way that birds and cows and goats and sheep are. And the way that we think about it, though, I mean, why do avocados still get on this list? Because they've got that large seed or pit. And if someone doesn't know about that and the pet is actually eating part of that, well, it really becomes either a choking hazard or it can block the intestinal tract. So that is the thing to be aware of. And then if the pit safely or the seed safely gets removed, but the avocado is being made into guacamole or something like that, and the pet gets enough of that, well, avocado has a very high fat content. And if, for example, your pet wasn't on a very high fat diet and then they got this big delicious amount of avocado with the high fat, it potentially could trip the trigger and cause inflammation of the pancreas or pancreatitis. So that seems like really a lot of things would have to happen, but it's being written about. It's listed on those poison control hotlines because they get calls. They get calls from people, and it's on there enough that it's something that you need to be concerned about. With regard to peach pits and cherry pits, it's not the fruit itself. It's really just, again, the pit that potentially could be not just a choking hazard or a blockage in the intestinal tract, but quite honestly, even if the pet were to bite down on it, they could break a tooth. So that's another concern. What about unbaked yeast dough? Well, if you imagine, if you're a bread baker at all, you know that dough can rise. And if a pet gets to eat some of that before it's baked, then that can really expand in their stomach or their intestinal tract and not only be painful, but it could cause this condition called bloat, which means the stomach can expand. And if it accidentally twists on itself, it could cause a blockage in the blood supply to the stomach. So that's a medical emergency. I guess it's also remotely possible that with the unbaked yeast, it can create like an alcohol effect on a dog, and the dog might actually look a little bit uncoordinated or act like it's a little bit drunk too. And then I think the last one I have, I didn't talk about the star fruit. You can look that up, but basically salt, as you know, salt moderation is absolutely fine. But when salt is consumed in an excessive amount, you can actually induce salt toxicity. So what are those signs? Vomiting and diarrhea, maybe some body tremors, an elevated body temperature. Also, if it goes prolonged and it's not treated or not identified, it could potentially lead to seizures and to death too. Okay. So mushrooms in general, I'm not sure too many of you would probably put mushrooms in your treats, but I did just think this was kind of interesting, and so I thought I would toss it in here for you. From the ASPCA and the Poison Control Hotline, what I was assured of was that many mushrooms are non-toxic, but some can cause serious disease, serious clinical signs, and even death. And so much depends on the type and the species. Those that have been reported the most are these pictures of these three at the bottom of this slide. So Amanita, Gallerina, and Lepiota are the species. And if animals are ingesting those, some of the signs can happen quite quickly within half an hour, and some might take what are considered many hours, like over 24 hours. So in general, they just say, mushroom consumption by a dog or a cat should just be considered toxic unless you have an absolute accurate and quick identification that the mushroom's non-toxic. Okay, so now I want to kind of segue over to a few comments about testing. Here's the AFCO manual. Every year they make a new edition, and there are some guidelines in there about largely, how does food need to be tested, what should be on the label, those sorts of things. If you're actually going to do a feeding trial, what does the feeding trial look like? And there is a little bit about pet treats, and commercial pet treats in the United States do have to have a guaranteed analysis, like I said, on the label. But the guaranteed analysis doesn't really tell us much about the nutritional quality or the actual quantity. The guaranteed analysis just says that there's a minimum of protein and a minimum of fat and a maximum of moisture and a maximum of fiber. That's it. So it doesn't actually tell you the exact amount of fat or protein or moisture or fiber. And unless you calculate out the calories per treat, it doesn't tell you that either. So there was a law or an AFCO guideline that was initiated back around 2016, in which the calorie content needs to now be on the label. And that was a big, I'd say a big step forward, because prior to 2016, you really just had to call the company and hope that they knew, or they'd calculated it, or they'd measured it, and that they would be willing to tell you. And we need to know what the calorie content is per treat or per cup or for some volume, so that we can have a pretty good idea that we're not over treating, over supplementing, overfeeding our pets. So I want to make the pitch that even though you don't have to have a guaranteed analysis and you don't have to have the calorie content, you should think about it. It would, at least the calorie content for number of treats in a bag, that would be useful for your pet owners, for veterinarians, and you would actually be helping your products in a small way look similar, so that people can make appropriate comparisons. That's really what I think is the most useful information for the pet owner on a label. Some pet owners really want to see as few ingredients as possible. Some pet owners don't want to see any preservatives. That's all well and good, but I think when making choices about how do I buy my treats and how many I'm going to give, I want to know, and I would advocate for number of calories per treat. Here's a few examples that I found mostly I think through Pinterest. I wanted to go and just look at, you know, what's available if somebody wants to see some nutrition facts for a variety of treats. So here's one over here on the right hand side. This says for one treat, 20 calories, and although it doesn't give you the actual guaranteed analysis, it does give you some information about the fat, the cholesterol, the sodium, fiber, protein. But quite frankly, I don't know what to do with that information because it's not relative to a dry matter or a moisture content, and I don't know what that dog is actually eating for its regular food. But if I know that there's 20 calories in one treat and I know the size of the animal, then I can give my best advice to the pet owner about how many of those calories, how many treats that dog should have per day. I don't know if any of you have talked to your family veterinarian before and asked, you know, like, can you help me figure out how many calories does my pet need and how should I be doing the treats? I'd be interested if you want to put that in the chat or let me know later. Like, my veterinarian always tells that to me. I've never heard my veterinarian say that before. This is an opportunity for you maybe to take some information to your veterinarian and have them help you, because I think that's really good information that every pet owner should know. For your pet's weight today and her body shape and the food that you're feeding, here's how many calories, so here's how many cups of food or grams of food your pet should have to meet her calorie needs. Our general rule of thumb in the world of veterinary nutrition for treats is that treats should make up no more than about 10% of a dog or a cat's total daily or total weekly calorie intake. So if the dog is maybe roughly 65 pounds and it needs about 1,000 calories a day, then its treat allotment would be 10% of that, or about 100 calories. And if we had these treats right here that are 20 calories per treat, then that dog could have 5 treats over the course of a day. Okay. Here's a treat that's got 65 calories. I'm assuming it's 65 calories in one treat. So, per ounce. Okay, it's 65 calories per ounce. We don't know how many ounces are in the package or how many ounces per treat. That would be important. But let's just say each treat is 2 ounces. All right, that's over 120 calories. So that same 65-pound dog that could have 5 treats over here, now they can only have like, I don't know, 3/4 of a treat from this particular product, if that makes sense. Here's something that's got 658 calories in a cup. All right, that's a lot of, I don't even know if that's a treat or not. I'm not sure. That's just an example. Here's one. The serving size is a 1-inch nutty nugget. I like that because you can say, okay, I can measure that myself. And there's 15 per container, and per serving, there's 70 calories or 71 calories in a 1-inch nutty nugget. Okay, my 65-pound dog could only have about 1 and a little bit more if I want to stay within that 10% of her total daily calories should be coming from treats. All right, I think I've hammered that one home. If you don't know the calorie content of your treats, I'd like you to try to think about how to measure that. And so here's a couple of examples. I know from the handout that I read that's the handout that's got those other resources, there are some laboratories in Minnesota, obviously, and you should call them and ask them, can you take a sample of my treats and actually measure or calculate for me calories per ounce or calories per piece? These 2 laboratories can also do that. Dairy One in Ithaca, New York, and Midwest Labs in Omaha, Nebraska. In my business, we work with these labs a fair bit, and they can do a guaranteed analysis for about $35 per sample. All right, so it's probably comparable to what you could also pay for from one of the labs in Minnesota. I think I think that's it. I came to the end, so I'm happy to answer questions now. Shelley, do you think you could look in the chat and see what they are, or shall I do it?
I'm looking right now. Never heard of a calorie recommendation, just doing good or getting, I can't. Rubenesque.
Is that a question?
I'm not sure.
It was an answer to your question, if anybody had ever had a vet tell them about how many calories they should have.
Gotcha.
Donna Valentine. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, here's a good comment from Kathy Brandt to everyone, encouraging you to contact your local food inspector or health inspector, because they can be a really good resource.
Yeah. Here's a question from Donna Valentine. She's, I believe she's in New Jersey. She says, what is your take on CBD included in for pets, or just CBD for pets?
Well, I did read a little bit about what are the rules and regs like in Minnesota for your cottage food producers. And hemp is considered something that's allowable, but not CBD. So when you also look at the ASCO rules and regulations, they're still out on allowing hemp to be something that would be suitable in pet food. So, so I think it's something that at least the organization ASCO will continue to look at, but most state feed control officials are going to be like, no, listen, if ASCO says no, we're going to say no for right now.
Okay, makes sense. You were talking about pancreatitis with some of the foods, and I just want to chime in. My daughters, my whole family, we all have dogs, and pancreatitis, because she rescued a dog who had a lot of bowel problems and stuff like that, and had been probably on the streets and stuff like that, but was just recently diagnosed with pancreatitis. And she's on a very, very strict diet now, and she's not that old. But whatever she got into a long time ago probably really affected her, because that dog was so sick. I have never seen a dog that sick before, and just in so much pain. So it's so important to really know what we're putting in these dog treats, because I felt so bad for the dog. It's also very, very expensive to diagnose and stuff like that, because for just one of those basic, there's a lot more blood work that needs to be done. And on top of that, you need to have an experienced vet who knows what to look for, because she had been seeing a different vet in a different area and they had never figured it out, but they did just finally figure it out. And her, even now to this day, because it is so bad, they have to watch her fat intake and everything. She's on a very strict diet. So yeah, it's really important as cottage food producers that we know what we're putting in our treats.
Yeah, good point.
What are some good base ingredients for pet treats? You mentioned nut butters. Thanks. So I had actually asked my vet about pet treats, because I told her that the bill had just passed, and she was the one who told me to be really careful about peanut butter, because a lot of peanut butters have that
xylitol
in it, and I did not know that.
I know. I think it's also possible that it might not end up being on the label. So I think if you've got a peanut butter product that you like and you want to use it, I think you should call the manufacturer and just see what they say. Just ask, right? And you've got, or better yet, write to them through their website, and then you've got documentation, right? A paper trail is a pretty good thing. When I don't make pet treats myself, but I certainly know a lot of people that do, and they do like peanut butter. I guess it kind of depends on what your purpose is with the treat. Because we have raw food manufacturers, and of course they want it to be raw meat in their treat. And then we've got people who would like to be holistic, organic, all natural. So they're more inclined to use things like oats and honey and peanut butter. So I'm not sure that there's a secret formula. I think it's really, you start with your own pets. What do they like? And you start with, your vision of your business and what you've got and what you want to try to promote. And you just keep working that and working that. Some people that come straight from sweet potato farming go, I'm going to make sweet potato treats. Okay, you can do that too. So I would say, just in general, you don't need a veterinary nutritionist to help you formulate your treats. Not like if you said, I want to go from treats to a complete and balanced food, right? Then you could really benefit from having a nutritionist who can help you figure out how to get that balanced with all the things you want to do. But when it comes to treats, if you're thinking about everything in moderation, I think there's many different kinds of ingredients, obviously, that you can bring into the mix, and some of it's just playing around with your own pets to see what do they like.
True.
And one of the things too is, it's my understanding is, for every pet, for the certain foods that can be consumed potentially, but might be on a list, you always just really want to, I'm not answering my let me start over. I was talking to you about this previously, and even some of the baking things that we use on a daily basis in our kitchens, for the example, cream of tartar, a lot of cream of tartars contain grapes. So I think when we're talking about pets and there's some things that are just potentially toxic, we really should know what all is in that ingredient. Would you agree with that?
Sure. And I think that top 10 list, or that first slide that I gave you, from alcohol to xylitol, if you start with that and you're looking at your base ingredients and making sure that you're avoiding those things, that's going to take you really far.
Okay.
I
Here's
think
a question.
I just want to say one other thing. With regard to safety, if you're making a treat, and let's say you wanted to put some turmeric in there, and you wondered, how much is too much? If the pet's just going to eat 1 or 2 or 3 of your treats a day, maybe that's no big deal. But you should think about, if you had a package of 30 treats or 20 treats, what if a dog accidentally got into your entire package and ate everything all at once? What would be of concern to you? Now, for me, just generally speaking, I'd be most concerned about what is the fat content of an individual treat and of all 20 or 30 treats, because fat can be more problematic. It might be the thing that would cause a dog or a cat to throw up immediately if they just got too much fat, as opposed to, a slightly high level of a spice or an herb or something like that.
Okay. Here's a question from Kelly. Are there any good organic vegetables that you would suggest to go into pet treats? Are there any vegetables that are really good for animals that should go into pet treats?
Well, Kelly, I'm not sure I'm the best one to answer that for you. I'll tell you why. Because I spend a lot of time thinking about what should go into the animal's food to make that balanced. And after that, vegetables or fruits or other things in the treats, that's like icing on the cake. It's not going to necessarily enhance or improve their health. It's nice for us to know, though, like my pet's getting blueberries or my pet's getting carrots, because I know that carrots have vitamin A. That's good for her vision, that kind of thing. But she's already getting, if she's eating a balanced diet, she's already getting what she needs. So when I think about the treats, rather than a particular fruit or a particular vegetable, I apologize, I'm just hammering this one, but I want to make sure that the calorie content is not too high. So here's one other tidbit for you. You know how I said that the general rule of thumb among veterinarians and nutritionists is that calories from treats should make up no more than 10% of their total daily calorie intake. Well, what you should also know is, I challenge you, go to the pet store nearest your house and go look at all kinds of dog treats and look and see how wide they range, and then look at cat treats. So most cat treats are about the size of your fingernail, your baby fingernail. All right, they're small. And the calorie content, when you look at the package for cat treats, is going to be somewhere between like maybe 1 or 2 calories to 4 or 5 calories per piece. Now you go and you look at all the dog treats, and they are super tiny, like little liver bites for training, all the way up to massive, big, giant milk bones and things that are even bigger than that. And the calorie content can be as little as 5 calories per piece to 300 or 500 calories per treat. It's huge. It's so wide. So with that kind of a range, again, veterinary nutritionists consider a low calorie treat something that's in the range of 10 to 15 calories per piece. And a moderate calorie treat is somewhere around 15 up to about 30, 35 calories per piece. And anything above that is a high calorie treat. And if you haven't measured your calories or calculated the calories in each of your treats, you just don't know yet. Where do you fall in? As soon as you know, if your product falls into a low calorie treat, boy, you should market the heck out of that. And you should make sure that your family veterinarian and all the veterinarians they know realize and know you have a low calorie treat. That's what they're looking for. Or at least I wish they were. I hope they are.
So what I'm hearing you say then is make sure you don't use any of the foods that could be toxic to the animals. You gave us a great list. And number one, and number two, really watch the fat in it as well, because that can make an animal ill as well. Also put on a lot of weight. Correct?
Put on unnecessary weight. That's right. That's right. It's all about too much of a good thing, right? You can have an adequate fat level, and you can have a treat that's 20 or 30 calories per piece, but then you should also know who is that best for? What kind of animal is that best for? And then can you take that same recipe and maybe make it with a little bit less fat, right? You could have the same base recipe and ramp one up and then maybe make it a little bit less fatty.
Fantastic.
Okay.
I have my dog next to me. Do you hear that, Nigel? No more cookies.
We'll bust those cookies up. That's okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being with us. And I have one more question. It has nothing to do with pet treats. So if you have like garlic and onions in a sauce, is that also dangerous? Because it's cooked into the sauce.
Right. I guess it depends. So if you just were asking me about your own pet,
Yeah.
first I'd want to make sure, has your pet ever had any kind of problems at all in the past with any kind of a food that you fed from your kitchen? And let's assume for a minute you said no. And then I would want to find out and make sure, is your pet basically healthy? And I'd want to know how old your pet was. So let's assume your pet is absolutely healthy. You've fed other people foods before, and you've never seen a problem whatsoever. And then I would ask you, well, how are you serving that sauce, right? Is that something your pet's going to get as a one-time treat, or are you giving that every single day for 10 days in a row? Let's assume you're just giving it as a little bit of a treat. I'd be like, okay, we'll try it, right? Go ahead and try it, because it's about risk assessment. And so let's say, and I'd say, the odds are probably, given all those assumptions, that I wouldn't expect your dog to have any kind of a problem. What I know from reading the literature is that the onions and the garlic, those effects are typically seen in animals in which they're eating it consistently over time, like regularly over time, or they eat a very large volume. And so odds are not so serious, so the risk is not that high. But if anything, it was different about those assumptions, in which I thought the risk was more than what I would be comfortable with for you, well, I would tell you that. And then I would know, you as a pet owner, you're going to do whatever you want anyway. But me as the veterinarian, I've kind of laid out for you, what do I think the risks are, and make sure you understand. And if I really thought you were doing something that was very risky for your pet, I would go one step further, and I would say, here are the things I want you to watch out for. All right. And if I thought it was really risky, I'd say, I want you to watch out for this, this, and this. If you see this or this, I want you to call me.
Okay.
This is the kind of conversation that any of you for your own pet can also have with your veterinarian, right? I'm thinking about trying X, Y, or Z with my pet. And I understand some of the risks, but I want you to tell me, what else do you think are the risks, right? So you hear what your vet says, and then you say, if I was going to do it anyway, under what conditions would you want me to call you? Right? And then you've got them thinking about it also. And they might not know right off the top what they want, but maybe later they think about it and they come back to you. And that's just a good ongoing conversation to have with your vet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much. A lot of great information.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm
Enjoy
excited.
the rest of your conference, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, you
for being
too.
with us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.